I was raised Southern Baptist in Eastern Kentucky, and you know, and I was received into the Catholic Church when I was a freshman in college, and then struggled with my life, you know, with what God was calling me to. And the joke is that by the time I graduated from college, I was having some thoughts about religious life and so on, but I wasn't ready for it. And I actually had no Franciscan connection yet. And so I ran away from God to law school, which, as I told my, you know, I told all my law school classmates, it was as far away from God as I could get. But it didn't work, you know, and so I ended up, it was the first place I ever went to daily mass, was when I got to law school. I was able to do that, and it helped me to get through law school. Otherwise, I don't think I would have. But by the time I was halfway through law school, I realized this is not going to go away, these urges, these thoughts about religious life. And by that time, I had read a biography of Francis. I was...
Which biography?
Journey in the Dream. And so I made contact with the Franciscans in Cincinnati. I was in Lexington, Kentucky, which is only 75 miles away, and started the process. Meanwhile, I was with the pastor of the Newman Center, knew that I was interested, and I was also considering the Benedictines. And so he said, I'll take you to visit the Benedictines in Latrobe, Pennsylvania. He knew them. He had studied some there himself. So he took me to visit, and I was incredibly impressed with them. And I thought, this could be it, you know, this could be it. But meanwhile, then we stopped in Cleveland at the Poor Clares on the way back so he could order some vestments. And we met the two little extern sisters, Poor Clare sisters. And they had halos. I know they had halos. I was sure of it when I walked out of there. And they also had it's a lithograph that was very popular in the 1930s, and it's the tree of Franciscan saints. And so the trunk is Francis and Clare, and then it's just these branches, and it's hundreds of Franciscan saints. So they had it up in their parlor, and I was noticing it. And so one of those sisters said, with just this total humility and a little bit of Franciscan pride, we have more saints than anybody. I knew when I walked out of that building, their monastery, when I walked out of it, I knew I wanted to be a Franciscan instead of a Benedictine, and I had yet to meet a Franciscan man. And so the next week I went to visit the friars and in Cincinnati, and you know, things just started, and they said, well, don't leave law school to come, because who knows if it will work out. And I certainly was not about to leave that half done. So in May of '79 I graduated from law school. In July I took the bar exam, and in September I went to the seminary. And so '79 was a rather eventful year anyway.
So you never graduated Franciscan School of Theology?
No. I say I went there for 1 year while I was on a sabbatical. Where I took some classes.
Oh, what seminary did you go to?
I initially went to St. Leonard College, which was an internal school. It was the equivalent of Franciscan School of Theology for St. John the Baptist province. But it closed. They closed and decided not to run it after I attended a year. So I also spent a year at Mount St. Mary's in Cincinnati, which we went to as a stopgap measure. And while the decision was made that then St. John the Baptist province has sent their students to Catholic Theological Union in Chicago ever since. And so I did 2 years at Catholic Theological Union. My transcript is a travelogue of the Midwest anyway, and so that's where I graduated. In 2004, went to the University of California at Santa Barbara, and that's where I did the PhD in history.
And what was your dissertation topic?
Franciscan Friars in New Mexico, 1957 to 1985.
Francis founded one order that two popes have divided into three groups. And so the one order that Francis founded, the Order of Friars Minor, or one order of men, I should say, the one order of men that Francis founded, then two popes divided into three groups. The popes saw and that what had happened over the course of centuries was that Franciscans continually argued with one another about how best to pray and to live the inspiration to poverty. And so that led to a group which said that, you know, the church has asked us as part of our prayer to be ministers, to be priests, to do this, and in order to do that, we have to study, we have to, I mean, this is the requirement of the church, and that's what Francis would want us to fulfill, the requirements of the church. So they lived in larger groups. They, you know, that gave more stability to their life so that they could study. Meanwhile, there were always those on the edges who said, we want to live in smaller groups and we don't want that kind of a conventual life. By the 1400s, these were definitely two different groups. And Bernardin of Siena became the first one who was named as a vicar within the whole Franciscan order for those who were living the stricter, as they saw it, the stricter, the less conventual life. And they maintained that they were observing the rule without changing it. So they were observants and the others were conventuals. That was, you know, as I say, it was de facto by the 15th century. In 1517, there was a legal separation of those two groups, so that you had the Order of Friars Minor conventual and the Order of Friars Minor, which the conventuals would have called the observants. But the Pope favored the observance, and so we didn't get anything added to our title. We didn't get anything, and in point of fact, we got the seal, but they did get Francis's body. So there in Assisi, you've got the Sacro Convento with, you know, at the Basilica of Francis, and so, quote, they have Francis's body, and we got the Portiuncula. And so the claim was, we got his spirit, they got his body. And that's the OFM version, that's the observant. But meanwhile, this was a century after. I mean, this is pretty well full on a century after the full thrust of reform. So by that time, the reformers needed reform. And along comes Matteo de Baccio, a brother among the observants, one of the observant brothers, not ordained, who has a vision of Francis wearing a different sort of habit than the one that they wore. And it just, you know, he has a vision. He's joined by two blood brothers, Matteo and Ludovico de Fasombroni, and they also say that, well, we can't, even though clerics in those days had become canon law for clerics to shave and so on, but Francis would have had a beard, and so the beard. So anyway, they join him. They're kind of reformer, dissident, and they lead to, or that leads to, the Capuchin Franciscans, who were recognized then in the 1530s and 1540s. And so those, and again, separated by another pope, so that you've got, as I say, Francis founded one group of men that two popes separated into three groups. And the result is the Order of Friars Minor, the Order of Friars Minor Conventual, and the Order of Friars Minor Capuchin. Now, the Order of Friars Minor continued to have people coming up with different ways of reforming and so on, but there was no other group that became completely separate. Then what happened by 1898, you know, after only 300 years of this, Pope Leo XII decided that it was time to try to clean some of this up. And he was a Franciscan. He had been fascinated with Francis for a long time and had a great interest in Franciscans. He wanted to clean this up, and so he took these various groups that had never separated completely within the OFMs, but who had each had some different rules and some different. From now on, there's going to be one set of rules. There's going to, one set of constitutions, excuse me. There's always only been the one rule of Francis, but there's going to be only one set of constitutions, one set of statutes. And so he did that, and he put together several different of these reform groups within the OFMs. And the joke is now that the Conventuals and the Capuchins say, well, you should be the Friars Minor of the Leonine Union instead of, you should get a title on the end of your name too. But we never have. we are still OFM Conventual, OFM Capuchin. Right now we're about 60 to 65. That depends on how you count the ones who are not solemn professed yet, the ones who are in formation. And so we have one who will be ordained priest in July, and another who will make solemn vows in July. Then we have 4 others in temporary vows, and we have 2 who are headed to the novitiate in August, and 2 who will be entering the pre-novitiate probably in September. So it's fluid, and all of those, of course, you don't count the chickens until they hatch. So
that sounded like about 7 or so.
7 or 8, I think. I forget.
How many of those are native speakers of Spanish?
All but 2. All but 2.
And are those 5 or 6 citizens of Mexico?
Most of them. Well, actually, I think at this point, all of them. All of those would be. All of those would be.
Are there any issues with passports?
Tremendous immigration issues. Two of the young men who were with us yesterday could not. They had to take off then last night to go for because they had visa appointments in El Paso today, and so they had to go. And so we have a terrible time. The government is just really not very receptive at this point, and so we have to be very careful, because it's also, if we ever have if we have one immigration issue go bad, then that taints us with the government. So we have to be super cautious and super careful on every single one, every moment. We had a young man who lost his passport. He was from Mexico. He lost his passport a few months ago. And so we had to send him back to Mexico, and he's starting the process over again. I mean, that's just the only way we can do it, is, if something happens. We're bound and constrained by that at this moment.
He lost his Mexican passport.
Yes, he's from Mexico. I think it was stolen here in the United States, or something happened. Anyway, what we try to get are R1 visas, religious worker. The R1 is the preferred if we can get them. They start on tourist visas. They will start on tourist visas, and then we try to make the change.
So the whole immigration reform and immigration issue
is huge. And that's not alone Guadalupe province, where what contact we have about those matters with every other province in the United States having the same issues, having the same difficulty. So we just have to be very cautious and very careful.
Santa Barbara.
Santa Barbara, clearly. And in Sacred Holy Name and Immaculate Conception are both headquartered in New York City. Sacred Heart Province is headquartered in St. Louis, and St. John the Baptist in Cincinnati, Assumption in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And so we have all had Mexican immigrant vocations in recent years. And so we've all had to deal with it. The first time that friars went to Pecos was in 1541 with the Coronado expedition. And in point of fact, one of the friars, an elderly brother, stayed at Pecos when the expedition returned to Mexico. A second friar also stayed. That is the one who went on to Kansas and who was killed in Kansas in an intertribal conflict. He was with one set of natives and then the other who were in conflict with another, and he got killed. And so, but the elderly brother stayed in Pecos and in all likelihood died of natural causes sometime not too long after 1541 or in 1541. Then in 1598, when Don Juan de Oñate came with 12 friars, one of the friars was assigned to Pecos and several other pueblos as the missionary there. So that would be the second time that the friars came. Then Pecos itself was abandoned in the 1830s. The people, they were down to, I think, 30 families or something. They moved in with their co-language speakers, the Towa speakers of Jemez Pueblo. And so they moved and the Pueblo was completely abandoned. At that point, there were no friars with them because basically the number of friars in New Mexico had been severely reduced by the political situation. With Mexico's independence, Mexico did not want Franciscans who tended to be peninsulares, who tended, they didn't want them as people also connected to the crown. They had been supported by the crown. So they exiled, they forced to leave all of the Spanish-born Franciscans, which was a number in New Mexico. And then the return, the third time, was in 1900. Archbishop Peter Bourgade, who had been Bishop of Tucson, was transferred here, knew the friars who had been at St. Michael's, Arizona, in his Tucson diocese. And he invited the friars from Cincinnati to come. So in 1900 they came to Peña Blanca, New Mexico, in 1902 to Jemez Pueblo, and continued to come. And then it was that Cincinnati province of Franciscans that began to come in 1898, 1900, 1902, that gave birth to my province in 1985. So we literally were formed from the approximately 100 missionaries that Cincinnati had sent, or who were present in New Mexico in 1985 from Cincinnati. I think about the whole sweep of Franciscan history in the United States. I speak of an hourglass. I talk about it as an hourglass. That what you have in that colonial period is this top-down evangelization sent by the Spanish monarchs, sent by the French monarchs, the Portuguese monarchs, and they come top-down. Well, with political reversals, all of those missions disappeared with the single exception of Mission Santa Barbara in California. And so it becomes like, by the 1840s, it's the only little connecting point. But also by the 1840s, you have coming from the bottom. You have immigrants from Mexico, from Europe initially, coming, and Franciscans coming with the immigrants. Over and over again, you have bishops in the eastern part of the United States who are desperate for ministers who speak German, which was one of the big language groups coming. And so they ended up going and seeking out religious communities who could send them priests, sisters who spoke German. In the 1840s, one of the first groups to send Franciscan missionaries were the Tyrolese Franciscans of Austria, who sent friars to Cincinnati, Ohio. Then very quickly after that, friars from Saxony in Germany sent missionaries to Illinois and St. Louis connected to that. Then you also had Franciscan conventual Franciscans who were sent to Galveston, Texas. Galveston, Texas in the 1850s didn't work out, and so they very quickly went to New York. Instead of, they saw the handwriting on the wall of where things were growing and whatnot, so they went to New York. But you have over and over again these communities that sent friars because bishops requested them to serve the immigrants who were on the bottom. So with those coming on the bottom, the hourglass turned over and things started moving, things started running again. They also started, they grew with the immigrant population. They grew, they prospered. So by the 1890s, there were a number of Franciscans in Cincinnati, a number in St. Louis, etc. Mother Katherine Drexel, at that time, as she was known then, Mary Katherine Drexel, had been a Philadelphia heiress to inherit the Drexel Foundation, the investment banking and all of this. So she inherits this, but she feels a call to ministry. She feels a call to become a nun. She founds the Sisters of the Blessed Sacrament with a special emphasis on working among Native Americans and African Americans. So that's her intent with her community. In the 1890s, she discovers that the Navajo Indian Reservation in northeast Arizona, northwest New Mexico, southern Utah, is the largest Indian reservation in the United States, and there are no Catholic missionaries. This was not something that Mother Katherine would abide. She was going to open a school on that reservation, but she was not going to do it until she had men religious so that her Sisters of the Blessed Sacrament could have Mass every day, could have the sacraments. So she went to various communities in the eastern United States looking for missionaries to send to Arizona. She got turned down several times. And so the story is that as she kept getting turned down, she would sweeten the offer a little bit at the next group. So by the time she got to Cincinnati, she told them, I will buy the place for the mission, I will support the missionaries, and I have been told that these Navajos have been so long in contact with Mexicans that they all speak Spanish, so it's going to be very simple with the language, and the climate there in Arizona is wonderful. So those good, good German Franciscans in Cincinnati, she's going to pay. it's going to be, say, oh, yeah, we will go. They decide they will go. Well, they dilly-dallied a bit, and she had to come back a second time, but when she did, that things moved. So 3 friars arrived in October 1898 to St. Michael's, Arizona, or what is now St. Michael's, Arizona. They were overwhelmed because Mother Katherine did exactly what she said she could do and she would do. She bought the place, she gave them a stipend, but someone must have misinformed her a little bit about all of them speaking Spanish, because they didn't find anybody who spoke Spanish. And as far as that climate, 4 months to the day after they arrived in October, in January, it was 20 degrees below zero at St. Michael's, because it's 7,000 feet above sea level there in northern Arizona. So anyway, it was quite the surprise to them. But those 3 pioneer Franciscans, Anselm Weber, Juvenal Schnorbus, and Placid Berger, good Germans, anyway, they set up a 20-foot high wooden cross, like a neon sign out in front of the trading post that she had purchased as the mission. So they set that up. They found a family, a man named Day, had opened a trading post himself there on the Navajo reservation, married a Navajo woman, and had 4 sons who had grown up bilingually. And so the fathers, at Mr. Day's insistence, would you teach my sons? And they said, yes, if they will teach us. So they, Anselm sat down with the dictionary, Juvenal with the dictionary. One started at A, one started at Z. They went through the dictionary, getting Navajo words for English words while they were teaching these boys. And that was the beginning of their linguistic study. And then as well, that very harsh winter, Placid was a lay brother. He was the cook, he was he was general everything. He kept a fire going, and smoke, coming out of the chimney of the trading post attracted people as well. And they started to do an exchange. If you wanted a cup of coffee, you had to give us words. So they got words from the Navajo. So they spent that winter coming, some sort of a basic grasp of Navajo, and worked away at it. And they had linguistic training already. They Latin, all these. The language of their home was German. The language of the street was English. The language of the church was Latin. They had been multilingual to start with anyway. So they were adept at that. In 1900, then Berard Haile joined them, and he was a linguist extraordinary. He began to just really work at the language. His career of over 50 years on the Navajo Reservation led to the publication of I think it's 20-some books on Navajo language and culture, which he had to invent an alphabet, and he basically did invent the alphabet that was initially used for recording Navajo. And so that's how we got here, if you will. Then very, very quickly after 1898 and 1900, when we started coming to New Mexico, the three principal ministries of Guadalupe province at its founding were the Navajo missions, the Pueblo missions, and Hispanics. So that was established by the year 1900. And we continue to do that, to work on the margins with those folks, primarily, now it's 111 years, 113 years. But Peña Blanca is significant, for all the little there is there that's picturesque. It's extremely significant in the history of the Franciscans since 1900 in the United States for a couple of reasons. The first is, as I say, it was the first return of the Franciscans to New Mexico after approximately a 50-year absence. Then second, it was for a while, it was the pastorate of Albert Dager. And then he was transferred after being at Peña Blanca, where he built a school which is no longer there, and did some other things. Anyway, he was transferred to Jemez, and he'd been at Jemez a very short time when in 1919 he was named Archbishop of Santa Fe. He's the only Franciscan to have served as Archbishop of Santa Fe. He was named Archbishop in 1919. World War I was under the armistice at that point, but the peace treaty had not yet been signed, and he, a German immigrant grandchild, is named Archbishop, and most of the clergy, almost all of the diocesan clergy of the Archdiocese of Santa Fe at the time were French. And so they were never quite happy with him. But he was Archbishop for 13 years. And then he died, unfortunately, in an accident, of all things. But then the other connection with Peña Blanca is that Angelico Chavez, which might be a name that you recognize, he lived, Fray Angelico, lived and worked there at Peña Blanca for a number of years. And one of the things that he had done, and one of the things that's one of those very unfortunate accidents of history, he had created mural stations of the cross using the faces of local people for all of the characters in the stations of the cross. in the church that collapsed, and so the paintings were lost. There are pictures of them, but the paintings themselves were lost. The human situation of the Spanish friars who came to New Mexico in the 1500s and 1600s especially, the human situation was that they were part of a Spanish empire that was totally convinced, after a 700-year struggle with Islam and with and after, at that point, a 100-year struggle with Protestants, that you had to be really firm about Catholicism, and that you had to be dead certain that this was the only way, or else you were going to mess things up. And so that was, that was the official line. That was the official line. Now, I think that that what you have in large measure is that you have Franciscans who were towing the official line, but at the same time not taking the human away from them. I think that you have as well what I refer to as spiritual DNA. This is an aside that I hope is going to lead us back. But anyway, John Vaughn, who was Minister General of the Order for 12 years, I described this to him, that a friar had told me that he thought that God used a cookie cutter to make friars. And so he would do a dozen at a time, but they only went one to a province. So you'd find one here in New Mexico, and you'd find one just like him someplace in New York, and another just like him in South Africa, and another just like him in Australia, and another, that they were scattered around that way. If you took the basic pattern of those different friars, that you could trace it back to Rufino and Bernardo and Francis and all the ones who were around him to start with, that somehow there's been this spiritual DNA that has passed among us and within us that's still there, which means that there's something that goes beyond the external, beyond the physiotype to the DNA. And in that you have Francis, who at once could sit and talk with the Sultan, and that also talk about how we need to tell the Sultan that he needs to become a Christian. I mean, that you've got both of those things going on. So I don't know if you noticed, but there's a kiva, that circular semi-subterranean structure that's right beside the mission church at Pecos. There are several of those here in New Mexico. And the latest theory, the latest understanding, because it just didn't make any sense when archaeologists started discovering these in the late 1800s, early 1900s, it didn't make any sense because the kiva it's a circular semi-subterranean structure used by Pueblo men for religious activities, except when it's square above ground and used by Pueblo women for social purposes. I mean, that's the quote definition of a kiva. So it was tied intimately to the Pueblo religion, pre-contact with Europeans. And yet, the latest thing is that the discovery that this kiva was contemporaneous with the friars living there. I think that we can never ever take the human out of the Franciscan.